The US has now recorded more than 1 million COVID-19 cases. That's almost a third of the global total. More than 58,000 people have died in America. Here's President Trump a short time ago.
You have to understand, when it comes to cases, we do much more testing than anybody else. So we could go to some of these other countries, as an example, China. If you test, you're going to show many more cases. So we're doing more testing than any other country in the world by far, which we just discussed over in the Oval Office. So we're going to show more cases because we're doing much, much more testing, double anybody else.
Well, we can go live now to Washington and speak to Katty Kay. Katty, lovely to see you. 1 million cases now reported in the United States, yet irregularities in the state by state and how they're reacting to this. What's the general feeling there?
It's a grim figure, isn't it? Getting to that milestone, and everybody expects that the actual number, of course, of people infected and possibly the actual number of people who have died of COVID-19 is higher than those, because although the president said that there is a lot of testing going on, America is still not testing enough, according to public health experts. And yet, as you have this 1 million people being infected figure coming out, you also have states starting to open up around the country. And it's causing quite a lot of confusion, because some states are doing one thing, some states are doing another. The White House itself is putting out certain mixed messages, with the president urging some states to open up quicker, but then actually criticizing other states for opening up too quickly. And to some extent, it's a reflection of the fact that this is a very, a state-driven country where people do different things. But I think some of the weaknesses of that system are being shown up in this particular pandemic and in this particular moment where some states open up and others don't.
And Cassie, President Trump has promised vigorous testing being available to all. How far are we now with that promise?
Look, as in some other countries, the lack of testing has caused huge problems here. Initially, the White House said that it was sending out millions of tests. It sent them out, but then there weren't the reagents in order to satisfy getting those test results. There weren't the swabs necessarily. In order for people to administer the test, the nurses who were meant to administer the test didn't have the protective gear in order to administer them. And all governors are saying that they would like to have more testing in order to open up the country. And you've got, the figures range for up to 22 million tests for Americans per day to 1 million tests for Americans per day. So the figures are kind of all over the place. But one thing is clear, is that America is not there yet in terms of sufficient numbers for governors to be able to say, OK, we can open up our state and keep a monitoring eye on where the hotspots might be.
OK, Katty, thank you very much for that. Katty Kay there in Washington. Well, as the global death toll passes 200,000, tensions continue to escalate between China and other nations over how the virus began. Let's bring Ross Atkins back in. Hi, Ross.
Hi, Babita. Yeah, let's pick up on this issue, starting with China's ambassador to the UK speaking to the BBC's Hard Talk programme.
China is a victim of the coronavirus. But China is not the source of this problem. China is not the producer of this epidemic. And that is something we have to come clean about.
You won't be surprised to know that President Trump sees it quite differently. He's saying he's considering suing China, accusing the Chinese of not doing enough early on to stop the spread of the disease.
We are not happy with China. We are not happy with that whole situation, because we believe it could have been stopped at the source, it could have been stopped quickly, and it wouldn't have spread all over the world. And we think that should have happened. So we'll let you know at the appropriate time, but we are doing serious investigations.
And to that, this was the response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
American politicians have repeatedly ignored the truth and have been telling barefaced lies. They have only one objective: shirk their responsibility for their own poor epidemic prevention and control measures, and divert public attention. But the facts speak louder than words, and justice naturally inhabits a man's heart. Their plot can never succeed.
So, no question, there's a major battle going on over the narrative of this outbreak, and this matters for domestic politics in China, domestic politics in the US, and also for both countries standing on the world stage. Let's look at how this has all played out. Go back to the 24th of January, and President Trump was tweeting, "China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The US greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi." But by March, the tone had completely changed. The White House National Security Advisor said, rather than using best practices, this outbreak in Wuhan was covered up. It probably cost the world community 2 months to respond. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson hit back at that, tweeting, "It might be the US Army which brought the epidemic to Wuhan. Be transparent," he said. "Make your data public. US owes us an explanation." I should say there's zero evidence to back up that particular accusation. And then in April, President Trump said the World Health Organization was too China-centric and announced the US would suspend its funding of the organization. Well, let's listen to the BBC's China correspondent Stephen McDonnell with his thoughts on these tensions.
The war of words between Washington and Beijing continues regarding the coronavirus, allegations going back and forth. It's been like this for months. Conspiracy theories being peddled by both countries, and often it's sort of in the form of a question, rhetorical question that seems to be designed to actually just throw mud at the other side. Now, we've had this latest broadside from Donald Trump and the response from the Chinese government. Geng Shuang, the foreign ministry spokesman, didn't mention the US president by name, but said certain US politicians were lying about the coronavirus situation in order to cover up their poor performance. And I think we're going to see more and more of this as other countries are being pulled into the debate over the source of the coronavirus, the extent to which China has covered it up, and the question of whether or not more could have been done to prevent its spread, and also the extent to which China should potentially have to pay for the damage from this disease spreading around the world.
Now, Australia is also being drawn into this now. China is accusing the Australian government of joining the US after the Australians suggested there needed to be an inquiry into how this virus started. Have a look at this from China's ambassador to Australia. The Chinese public is frustrated, dismayed and disappointed with what Australia is doing now. Maybe the ordinary people will say, why should we drink Australian wine, eat Australian beef? And bear in mind that China is Australia's largest trading partner. Well, Australia's Trade Minister responded saying Australia is no more going to change our policy position on a major public health issue because of economic coercion or threats of coercion than we would change our policy position in matters of national security. But as one academic told the Sydney Morning Herald, he's huffing and puffing after the house has already blown down. China has already done more damage to our economy than any boycotts could. And this is why the story matters so much. It will directly impact on China's relationships in the world. Well, let's speak to Zhao Feng from BBC Chinese, who's based in Washington. Zhao, what did you make of those comments directed at Australia? It was quite a different tone to the one we've heard from the Chinese.
Indeed. And only 2 months ago, China was overwhelmed by the pandemic. But the tide has turned now. China appeared to be getting its outbreak under control, while Western countries are still scrambling to ease the pandemic. And this contrast has emboldened Beijing to push back at criticism and skepticism coming from countries like Australia and the US. And when facing all these questions surrounding the start of the outbreak, China's response has basically been, mind your own business, get your outbreak under control, and don't try to shift the blame on us. And this is also part of Beijing's campaign of narrative. The country is eager to turn the page about its early handling of the pandemic and to repair its damaged international reputation. But some might argue that by making aggressive threats, like the one you just mentioned, Beijing has further damaged its reputation.
And you were saying China wants to turn the page. Just help us understand better the risks here for China if it loses control of the narrative.
Yeah, the narrative about the origin of the virus is very important because it has a lot to do with China's international image. If the rest of the world continues to associate the virus with China and to blame the great human and economic losses on China, this will be a huge public relations crisis for Beijing.